Hello and welcome back to, well, I guess not back. This is our first episode, but we did just record a pilot. Welcome to Adventures Unpacked. We're Adventures Live, and we are going to take this time to sit down with an adventurer who's been filming with us, who goes on any type of trip or expedition or adventure. And we're going to sit down and unpack the details and logistics of going on the trip, anything that doesn't really come across in the adventure vlogs that we edit and put up on our main channel over at Adventures Live. I'm Noah. I'm going to be your host, and today joining me is Jeff.
What's up, people?
So we are going to sit down and talk about our first big adventure video, which will be Get Out There, which Jeff hosted and filmed. So if you kind of want to just take the reins and tell me, what was that episode to you?
Yeah, so that episode was filming bits and pieces of my staff training where I was learning how to do some technical things in the backcountry, how to properly choose a campsite, set up camp, some general wilderness safety, because in that area we have grizzly bears. The rivers and streams can get pretty high and strong, especially in the early summer when we were going to be leading trips. So there was just a lot to learn, and like how to run a trip. And it actually was my first backcountry camping trip ever. So there was a lot to learn, both in terms of the company's policies, but also my own personal skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was 2 nights, and yeah, and there was a lot to learn with the recording stuff too. I'd never really recorded myself or interview, like talk to a camera before. There's so much to learn, and it was all in 3 days.
Yeah, very short amount of time. I'm very excited to get into that with you, and we'll kind of dive into that more. But I think we'll kind of introduce ourselves a little bit now that they got an idea of what we're going to be talking about in this episode. Like I said earlier, I'm Noah. I am a outdoor and wildlife photographer and filmmaker. That's where my passion and my heart lies, is behind the camera and capturing really amazing animals and everything to do with the outdoors and wildlife specifically. I started Adventures Live up with a handful of friends, and the team's growing currently. And I think we want to film a variety of outdoor media. Jeff, if you want to go ahead and talk a little bit, explain who you are and how you fit in.
My name's Jeff. I'm an outdoor educator by trade. Spent about 8 summers working at a few different summer camps across the United States. But most recently, I've been transitioning into professional wanderer. Yeah, I just fly by the seat of my pants most recently, and I do whatever work I can find to help me afford to the trips that I want to go on, and then I share them with you.
Jeff is kind of our newest addition to Adventures Live. If you've been following us at all, you might have noticed that we have been on a 2-year hiatus. We've taken a break from filming, and we've kind of taken a pivot, and we're focusing more on outdoor content. So we decided to bring on my close friend Jeff here, and he's helping head this new Adventures Live that you're seeing here today. So we're going to sit down with Jeff today and talk about this first video that you've made with us.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about where, I mean, this is where it started, and compared to where we are now, I feel both nostalgic for that time, but also grateful that I've learned a lot since that first trip.
This was actually your first time filming ever, right? I mean, we mentioned this in our pilot episode that we just recorded over on Patreon, but that kind of kickstarted this whole thing. You took the GoPro out there for the first time and filmed it. How did that feel to you, kind of filming for the first time, not only behind the camera, but in front of the camera as well?
Yeah. Well, just for some context, I'm the kind of guy that you'd be hard pressed to get me to record a video on my phone of just the nature when I go somewhere, let alone be in front of the camera. Like sometimes I take a picture of myself with something beautiful in the background just to share with my mom. I was far away from on the spectrum of the type of people who like to put themselves in video format or pictures with the thing, however beautiful it is. But yeah, it was a huge shift to put myself in front of the camera, and then specifically sometimes to like sit it down somewhere and talk to it like it's a person, that was very weird, because cameras don't give you anything. They don't give you any feedback of like, oh yeah, or oh, okay, interesting, or I don't care. It's just expressionless.
It's always just a super awkward thing at first. And, you know, sometimes you warm up to it.
Yeah, it just feels like you're a little crazy, you know, like you can see yourself. And if you could see yourself, you think that person's insane. They're just talking to nothing. That was a challenge, a hurdle to overcome for sure. And that didn't really, I don't feel like I actually got over it until a few months later when I was recording stuff that you'll eventually see on the channel. I guess a little teaser. Yeah, I had a solo backpacking trip in Yellowstone, and that was a few days long. And that, like, I used it as an opportunity to kind of journal my thoughts out loud, because that was a very challenging and transformative experience for me. And it did not go as I expected. So I think that's the turning point for me. That's when I realized that this could be like a beneficial tool, you know, interesting for other people and also helpful for me in the moment. Yeah. I was in.
Backpedaling a little back to your first time. This was not only your first time filming on this trip, but it was also your first time backcountry camping and backpacking, correct?
Yeah, all true. I had done, you know, car camping trips and front country campsites, you know, maybe somewhere like not too far away from a toilet. So being in the backcountry completely away from all facilities and really all people was a new experience, like carrying all my supplies on my back. It's one that I'd wanted for a while, but yeah, this is my first time doing that. You
were in the Bridger-Teton National Forest and Yellowstone, like that whole Wyoming area. Do you want to explain kind of what you were doing there and what led you into this opportunity?
Yeah. So the company that I was working for, they organized this trip completely. So I just kind of was along for the ride. We were doing most of our training on the Idaho side of the Teton Mountain Range. So if you don't know the area, the Teton Mountain Range is kind of an extension sort of the Rocky Mountain Range throughout the United States, but it feels like it stands alone. I mean, and how it fits. I mean, when you're there in person, no, you might be able to attest to this. I mean, it feels like just one range, the Tetons by itself.
It feels like its own thing. When you're sitting and looking at it, it's like, okay, I see it right here. It's got a very distinct visual identity.
Definitely. I think it was actually used in a lot of old Westerns, actually. Just a great backdrop for, I mean, pretty much anybody with a camera.
As someone with a camera, I can 100% attest to that. And not only just the mountain range features itself and how jagged and almost wall-like they are, right? But you come down off the mountains, for anyone who hasn't been there, and it almost completely flattens out into like fields and plains at that point. Did you have any like specific feelings being there that really resonated with you?
Well, I mean, the mountains themselves blew me away. I think I first arrived along with a van full of other newbies. We arrived on the Idaho side. So actually what you see in the intro to the video when it says the Teton that's the Idaho side. And it felt like in the live action Grinch, and the one that Jim Carrey stars in. Yeah, I know. Trust me, it's a walk, but we get there. The mountain that he's on, right? It feels so massive, and the size of it as a little kid I was very impressionable. And that's the vibe I got as I was driving, you know, or being driven along this country road. That was like a shadow. The shadow of a mountain kind of started to make its appearance clear through the clouds. It was a very cloudy, stormy kind of day. And we'd had a break in the rain just as we were entering into this area. And I remember some of the people in the back seat were just like, what? That's where we're going to be training? Shut up. One person legitimately started crying. I'm not kidding. They were just blown away. So yeah, I felt excited, immensely grateful, and a little terrified because the trip that I had been assigned to was, amongst many other things, attempt to summit that mountain that we were seeing looming in the distance.
Go get to the top of that.
Exactly. Not just you for the first time ever, but also do that with 12 teenagers.
You were not only guiding, but you were guiding teenagers on these trips.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, it was 2 3-week-long trips, and they were, all teenagers, all 13 to 17 years old. And it was just me and my coworker through that whole slog. So it was really 6.5 weeks, because I think between the two trips was only a 2-day difference. So we had a 3 weeks, 2-day break, 3 weeks. And so it was just like a punch you in the mouth kind of speed. It was brutal.
So you're arriving there and you're first seeing these Tetons, right? How are they prepping you to get into this excursion that you filmed for us? What is that looking like for you getting ready to go on this trip, getting you out into the backcountry for the first time?
The few days, it was like a week. So we had a week of training, and then we were kind of like going into staff training trips. And depending on the type of trip you were going to lead for this company and the part of the world that you were going to be in, you would go to a different location and you would practice different things.
Sure. Yeah.
So our group, like our pod, as they were called, we were going to be in that area. So not everyone for that company was going to lead in the Wyoming, Idaho, Yellowstone ecosystem. They were going to be all over the world, from Alaska to Hawaii to North Carolina, right? So since we were going to be in that area, we're prepping for a trip locally. So the week leading up to that, we were just doing policies and procedures and all stuff you got to do. And also just bonding as a team, right? You're going to at least be familiar with these names and faces throughout your summer. And then, we get to the day before the trip, and it's a lot of prep. We're doing tons of gear checks, basically just taking everything out of storage, and we're testing every stove. We are cleaning out we're setting up every tent. I mean, the field looked insane. There was probably 70 three-person tents on this field alone, just airing things out, looking for damages. And then we were kind of briefed on route that we were going to take and the location. And that's when we found out we were going to be on the Wyoming side of the Teton Range, which is the most popular side. Most people that are going to see the Tetons, or at least visit Grand Teton National Park, they're going to see it from the Wyoming side because that's the prettier side, more easy to access. And that's when we found out we were going to be out there, and we were going to do it for, I believe, it was 2 nights. So we had like an in-day, a layover day, as we'd call it, and go to bed that night and then wake up, and then we'd leave the next day. Or out day.
So do you have an estimate of how much gear you specifically took in? I'm assuming from the video, I mean, everyone's packs looked loaded up. Do you have any estimate of what you took in?
That's a good question. My pack was almost assuredly too heavy. And I say that with hindsight. Like I think about it now and I'm like, wow, for a 2-night trip with that many people, like you got to bring in a lot of food. I think we had 13 people in our pod. So if you think about 13 grown adults for not just that amount of time, but that kind of strenuous activity. And then that food also has to be easy to carry, like it can't be gourmet, it's you got to think about how it can be packaged down, how it can be simplified. So there was a lot of food, and each of us we had 3-person tents. That's like kind of the standard for that company. And so we would kind of like have tent groups, and in those tent groups, each person take like 1/3 of the tent, more or less. And we try to distribute the weight evenly. So like if we have like a smaller stature person, they're not going to get equal weight to the person that's bigger and can clearly handle more. And you try to do the same on your trips. When you've got students who can clearly handle more weight, you're going to give them that weight. So I had not just my 1/3 of the tent, but then half of someone else's tent. And it was my first time putting on a backpack and carrying it for that many hours. So it was definitely not strapped properly and set up. My back was aching.
Were you still using your personal pack? Was this like your Osprey at the time?
Yeah, it was 65 liters, and most people had their own backpack.
I gotta imagine if you have your own pack, you're probably gonna want to stick to that. So what was the trip actually looking like? Like, what was the trail and the distance to the campsite? Because you guys hiked in day and then camped at the same campsite for that day all the way till out day, correct? So it's just one camp.
Yep. That's so when we have a layover day, if I ever mention that at any point, that's like specifically refers to that campsite. So you can have like a multi-day camping trip, but just because you have days in between your in and your out day doesn't mean those are layover days. A layover day specifically refers to your camp has not moved, and you're just hanging out, whether that's chill or for us it was educational. We were learning a whole lot of procedures and whatnot. So we were at the Turpin Meadows campground trailhead area. So we drove in, and funny enough, so this is the approach, as I'd call it, which is kind of ridiculous if it's a drive. Since we were on the Idaho side, we'd have to drive to the Wyoming side to get to the Bridger-Teton National Forest. And that day was the day that the pass collapsed.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was national news at one point. I mean, it was completely unexpected, but if we had left an hour earlier, then, and that was actually, we were scheduled to, we were running behind on the schedule. If we had left on time, we would have been caught either in that traffic caused by the road basically just collapsing, or, you know, heaven forbid, any of us could have been caught in the slide itself. So really grateful that we were running late that day.
I always forget every time you mention it that was the same day, because it was national news. I definitely remember seeing that pop up on all of my feeds, and it's still kind of just unbelievable. I'll see if I can't find a picture and throw it up here. But yeah, the whole road just kind of fell out. It was a pretty big deal. It took a handful of months to repair now.
Yeah, I mean, they were expecting it to take years. So the fact that it was ready by the end of summer again, I think everyone was shocked, and they were really on it. And driving up the pass, driving uphill or downhill for that matter, driving in general with a 15-passenger van and a trailer behind you, all the people go in the van and then all of the gear goes in the trailer. Yeah, driving with those things on anything other than flat ground is, it definitely takes some time to get comfortable with. So yeah, if we were on the pass going up the path and then the road just, I mean, there's literally nothing you can do. You'd just be screwed.
So you didn't end up going up the pass, correct? You guys had to find a different way to get around the mountain.
Yeah. So if the pass is down, which it was, the only way to get to the Wyoming side is all the way around the Teton Mountain Range. What was going to be like an hour drive to our trailhead ended up being like a 3.5-hour drive, which was a real bummer. But it meant I got to see more of the range. Yeah, anyway, we finally make the drive and we get to the campground. And that night we stayed in the front country because it was just a lot of hours to get there and we were all pretty tired. Yeah. So, and that's where I'm like, I set up the camera and you see one of my coworkers, James, like wave. They're like playing with the camera because we're all outdoorsy types and it's pretty common for none of us to be like tech types. And so when someone's got a camera and they're recording stuff, it's kind of fun for everybody. So yeah, we just kind of camp that night to keep it pretty chill. And then we get up early the next morning. We learn not just how to pack our packs, but then how to teach how to pack everyone's pack. And we drove few minutes to the trailhead because the campground we were staying at was very close to Turpin Meadows. Then we got into our group, looked at the map, and went over the route for the day.
Nice. All right. Well, at this point, I'm going to take a second to thank our sponsors, and then we will get right back into this right after the break here. Sponsors? There are none. It's us. We're Adventures Live. We do have a Patreon that should be up and running by the time that this video is out to you guys. So if anybody is interested in supporting what we do here, we do have a Patreon set up for you. So you guys can come over here and choose a variety of tiers from free to $1 to $5. And we will be providing back to you, hopefully, equal value. The long-term goal of this, we would like to film a bonus podcast episode supplementary to this, where we go even more in depth of whichever trip or adventure we're talking about. And we'll kind of lay out our maps, our itineraries, our gear, and everything that you might need if you are looking to take on this adventure and recreate it yourself. If you're not, wanting to spend any money on us, that's totally okay. We can't ask you for anything more than your attention. So if you're enjoying these videos and you like what we do here, feel free to like and subscribe and make sure you share it. I think that's the biggest thing that you can do if you're looking to support us, is just kind of get the word out. Let people know who might also be interested in the same things that you are, and see if we can't build this community together. Either way, thank you so much for your support or your interest, and let's get back into the episode. All right, so you guys are now getting into the actual trip that we see on camera. What was the mileage on this? What is this looking like?
Yeah, it's pretty beginner friendly. It was 4 miles total to get to our campsite, so not bad at all for the average backpacker, but for beginners, like most of us were, it was a lot to learn. The beginning of the trail is almost entirely uphill, so immediately you start to question your choices for the summer.
So this was your first time being in the backcountry and first time backpacking. How were you feeling getting into this? I know you just mentioned that the first section's kind of making you regret it. Is that kind of the overarching feeling, or is there any excitement in there?
Yeah, no, it's incredibly exciting. I mean, just putting on the pack in the first place, you're like, oh, I'm doing the thing, you know? And I've been wanting to get into this sort of stuff for a couple of years at this point. Yeah, it was super exciting. And I knew that there was going to be a lot of challenge laced in with the excitement. And it just happened to hit me immediately with the hill. Going uphill is hard enough, right? You know, you're on a strenuous hike or whatnot. And I've done a couple of those, but yeah, this one was, I mean, when you have 30 to 40 pounds on your back, that's also not distributed properly because I did not know how to properly use my strap. You know, all the weight is in weird places, just sweat dripping down my face instantly, wondering to myself, wow, what have I gotten myself into?
This was early summer, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What was the weather looking like in Wyoming then?
It's early June, but it doesn't feel like what you'd think early June looks like. The area is actually referred to as the Intermountain West. So in that area, the days are pretty temperate. I'd say they were in like the mid 70s, low 80s. Sun can get pretty warm at times. So layers are helpful just to block the sun from toasting you, as it does to my skin most of the time. But the nights are very cold. So we'll actually probably talk about this at some point when we talk about the summer videos. But the first night of my trips that I led with my students, it snowed on us probably about half an inch, which I was not expecting leading summer trips. It would get pretty cold, but in general, we're looking at pretty good weather. Perfect mosquito weather.
Was there a bunch out there for you?
Oh my God, dude. Yeah, that place is gnarly. Any standing water at all and you're going to get swarmed.
So how were the paths looking like that you guys were hiking on this trail? Were they all just dirt paths then, or?
So this is actually a horse trail. Really all that means is that the trail is usually a little bit wider and it's not as well trekked. So if a trail is on a trail map in a park, there's a good chance that there's been lots of people who have just like walked on it, and that does a lot to, you know, just kind of erode the area and make it clear which way you're supposed to go. But then there's also probably park workers, people who are actually maintaining the trail. When it's a horse trail, that's less common. My understanding is that, especially even in like national forests, they're less funded than the national parks. Are already underfunded. So you can imagine the type of maintenance that can be done in those areas. And the forests are normally even bigger than the national parks. So it's just not a lot of maintenance done on any of these routes, but horses can get through a whole lot more than people can.
Yeah. Was the trail itself, like the dirt in the ground, a little looser that all those horses are coming in and kind of tilling it up?
I mean, yes and no. So in certain sections, like in the bright sun, everything's very loose because it had also rained pretty recently in that area. So sections of the trail are flooded. And then because the horses come through and they are so much heavier and bigger, they do have that capability to really churn up the ground. And that just turns it into slush and mud. And so when the sun heats it up, because of that crazy temperature differential, in the daytime, in bright sunlight, all of that just melts into this muggy, like really tough, like sledding. And I think there's actually a part in the video where you get to see that.
Yeah.
That's just one of my coworkers trying to show off how waterproof his boots are.
I hope for him that they were pretty well sealed and his socks weren't completely coated after that.
Yeah, no, they seem to be okay. But yeah, his shoes never recovered. They were so muddy for days afterward. The rest of us were going like just off to the side. Like he could have just avoided it. In some sections, like the ground is just completely frozen and it's really difficult to get a solid footing because it's all churned up from the horses and then overnight it freezes. So it's just this like crusty, muddy thing that's like hard to get a good foot on, which is not a huge deal when you're just walking on the trail. But when you've got all this weight on your back, you know, not twisting your ankle is kind of the first thing on your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So this being your first time kind of in the area and out in the backcountry, was there anything that really, you know, took your breath away or caught your attention on your way into the campsite here?
Yeah, two moments that stand out to me are just at the crest of the hill. So towards the beginning of the trek, you turn around and you see the Teton Mountain Range in all its glory. At that point in the year, it was still snow capped. So like all of the mountains still had a good amount of snow, and it looked like the Emerald City, if you're thinking about it, like the Wizard of Oz, glowing, beautiful thing in the distance. But I imagine like if I was a pioneer back in the day, like if I was going on the opposite side, just bushwhacking through all this stuff, you get to the top of the hill and you're like, well, we made it. Like that's the goal. That was incredible. Once we get through all of the stuff that we were getting through, both creek crossings, muddy patches, sections of uphill, mosquitoes swarming us, we finally made it through that section of the bush, and it kind of, the trees cleared and we opened up into a valley, and there were some mountains in the area. I think I'd say something like, oh wow, this really opened up, and it was gorgeous. Yeah, that was awesome. I could just sit and stare at those mountains all day.
So when you guys are actually getting into the valley and where the campground I believe it was the Buffalo Fork River, what's kind of the feeling of you guys getting there and kind of completing this first leg of your first backcountry experience?
Man, after a full day of carrying that much weight on your back, and I think most people feel this when you hike with other people, it just bonds everyone, right? That shared torture is kind of what it is. Like everyone is having a hard time with like the same things. But it's also like a labor of love, right? We choose to struggle in this way. And so, yeah, everyone is just like to be done with it.
That definitely comes across in the video. There's a shot of it when you guys are first arriving to that kind of grove of trees in your campsite, and everyone just kind of starts applauding and cheering, and it was a really cool moment to see. It felt like a little moment of accomplishment for you guys, because like you said, you all struggled together to reach this common goal, so the cake's got to taste a little bit sweeter.
I mean, yeah, like everything feels better when you work for it. The nature feels more beautiful. The sun feels just like that perfect temperature on your skin. The wind is blowing and you've got this like big sweat patch on your back. So when the wind comes by and it just like, it hits just right and you feel so good. And you realize that you're in this place that most people won't get to experience because they won't do what you just did, right? Like it's inconvenient and kind of, most people won't take the time and effort to hike 4 miles into a place just to hike 4 miles back out because they don't have a camping setup. So that's when it starts to feel really special.
So I really want to kind of dive into this part a little bit more, because this is, out of the whole trip, I feel like the least amount of time got spent here highlighted in the video, and you guys actually spent a day in this campsite before you guys actually hiked out, correct?
Right.
So what does that look like for you guys? What were the activities, the feeling of the group, and what were you guys up to there?
For some people, it was their first time working with kids in the outdoors. So they were like really in their growing zone. They had no idea really what was going on. And so we were talking about how you facilitate a group. We were teaching them how to play some games. There was also some more technical things that I was definitely needing to tune into more, like how to avoid encountering grizzlies, right? How do you handle your smellies? There's a whole like booklet that they have that every trip takes out. And so we were learning some of the recipes, and each time it was time for a meal, we would like have different cook crews. And so, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, whichever one I'm on, I'm like learning how to work with the stoves and how to do some stove maintenance in case this one goes out, right? They're kind of known for breaking all the time. It's a lot of like general know-how, right? Like, can you anticipate the weather, right? Here's what these clouds might mean. Here's how you use the sat phone to be in communication with the office. And the biggest thing with animals is just how to avoid encounters, because once you are in the encounter, then there's limited options. But if you can avoid it entirely, that's the key. And so we spent a decent amount of time on that, since the group was going to be all leading trips in grizzly country. We spent some decent amount of time on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Did anything stand out to you specifically setting up camp for the first time in the backcountry that you would have to do different?
There's a handful of things were different than what I was used to. In the front country, which is just the name we use for like typical campgrounds, right? You're not far from a bathroom. You probably parked either right next to where you're setting up your tent or pretty close by. You just got facilities and people to help you. You're not far from anything. That ground ground is usually all like pre-prepped for you, right? That's why you pay for it. There's a lot that goes into prepping that area, from making sure the area is flat enough to not going to get washed out if it rains or flash floods, that you have proper storage for your food, your smellies, as we call them. All of that stuff, from where to place your tent, all the aspects of how to set up camp, properly store your food. That's all your responsibility in the backcountry. Another huge piece of it is how to properly dispose of and store your waste. At least for me, that was my first question. It's like, so how do I poop? Like, I need to know how that works.
This was your first time pooping, wild pooping almost, right?
Yep. We call them wilder poops. You get a badge when you take your first poop, and it's really celebratory. That was one thing too. Like, you try to reduce the stigma and the discomfort around it. How do you reduce that? How do you make it fun? I personally love to make it like a group objective out of it. I would tell the group, based on how many days we're going to be in the backcountry, the goal as a group, how many times we will have pooped. And so like each person, we'd do check-ins, and I'd say, what's your poop count at? And then they would put their hand up and tell me how many poops, and I would count as a group. And you also try to reward people who break the seal first.
I'm sure we'll go more into wild poops or wilderness poops. We will probably make a video going into the proper procedures and leave no trace. Real quick before we move on, I got to ask, your first poop out there, did you do the tree lean?
That one, I tried to replicate a toilet by like sitting on a log. It did not work. I did not like it. It was also very hot, sweaty, and buggy. So, that was a tough one. I won't lie. It was not, just on all levels. It was very challenging. But I resorted to what's called the tripod, which is my leg out and then one hand in the back that I use as support. And little did I know at the time, but that's when I discovered my favorite pooping position in the woods.
All right. Well, moving away from poop, we were like, oh, we'll start up Adventures Live again. We'll start a new podcast. It'll be more mature. And yet here we are still talking about poop. So yeah, you guys are set up at camp. You guys are working through a lot of your different procedures and learning kind of the tricks of the trade here. Is there anything else that happened or occurred to you that you feel like is important to highlight while you guys are actually in camp?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I just remembered at night. So the stars in the backcountry are insane. If you haven't had an opportunity to go out on a camping trip far from any lights, I highly recommend it. Like I said, everything's sweeter when you work for it. So once you've hiked out really far, you really feel like you're far from everything. The stars are some of the best company that you're going to find out there. Some people in the group knew some constellations, and so they were teaching us how to read the stars and some of the stories that go along with it, which was awesome. And while we were doing that, I thought I saw my first ever UFO.
Really?
It was, we were looking up at this constellation. It was right next to Orion's belt. All of a sudden, this one dot, it was really bright, was moving from like just behind me into my vision. And then it was followed by another dot and another dot. And they were all moving in this line really rapidly through the sky. And I thought to myself, what in the world am I looking at? That's insane. So I started to go kind of crazy for a second. And then someone next to me said, oh, look, there's Starlink.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, right. Yeah, I knew that.
I love UFO stories. That's super cool. Yeah, I'm not sure if you told me that or not.
The next morning, so the morning of out day, I was talking with one of my pod leaders. So the person kind of teaching us all these skills. He told us that he's pretty sure a grizzly walked through our camp that night.
Really?
He's a light sleeper, so he could hear some rustling and stuff. And if you don't know, grizzly bears, all bears, but specifically grizzlies, have just this wonderful sense of smell. Pretty sure even though we had all of our food and smellies, not just food, stored properly, they'll probably just check it out if they're interested. And in the dead of night, no one's moving. And so he heard some rustling. So he woke up to that. He's terrified of bears. So he was kind of frozen in his sleeping bag when he heard this sniffing sound next to his ear.
Oh, wow.
It was close. That it felt like it was right in my ear. If you've ever slept in a tent before, you know that doesn't provide any actual protection besides from rain. So when he said it was sniffing, it was probably right next to his face. We're pretty sure it was walking through camp, and there was some evidence, like some gap nearby. Yeah, we're pretty sure a grizzly walked through camp. I'm just glad no one woke up and spooked it.
But I mean, you guys are all taking proper precautions. You guys are armed with bear spray and possibly bear fences.
Yeah.
Tearing down, considering you guys had so many people and so much stuff. Was that kind of a big hassle?
Well, that's the nice thing about having lots of people, is that camp can actually get packed up pretty quick.
Oh, nice.
And maybe I just have hindsight, because every camp that I packed up after that was 2 adults and like 12 teenagers. When you have 13 adults, yeah, things move pretty quickly.
Is there anything interesting that didn't come across when you guys are, heading out on out day? I believe you guys caught some rain on that final hike out.
Yeah, besides the rain, no, it was a pretty straightforward hike out. I think all of us were pretty tired. That trip took a lot of energy out of everyone. And yeah, the rain was just an added challenge, but it was good. I got to test out some of my gears. The first time I tested out my rain jacket, my trekking poles, because the mud got muddier.
It didn't really matter to that guy earlier. His boots were already muddy. And I think we kind of covered a lot of stuff from this first trip in this first video that you filmed with us. Is there anything you kind of want to leave us on moving forward with these other trips that you went on that you filmed for us that will be coming up after this, or just kind of your future with Adventures Live and what you're looking forward to?
When it comes to the summer trips, whatever it ends up looking like, the summer trips were nothing short of life-changing. I learned so much. I got to do so many things for the first time ever, while also doing something that I love to do, which is work with students. It was a challenging summer, but it was also incredible. And I'm excited I captured bits and pieces of it, because the nature out there in Northwest Wyoming is gorgeous. And I had no idea what I was missing. I had never heard about it. You hear about Yosemite and places in California like the Redwoods and the PNW, right? But the Intermountain West is not necessarily got that like shine to it, and it should. So yeah, the summer videos, I can't wait to get that video together and put that out for people, because yeah, I think that's a great story to tell. Lots of change and growth as far as Adventures Live in general. I mean, wow. When we talk about change from this first staff training video, where I thought I was just recording stuff for you as like a favor to get you some nature B-roll, basically, to where I'm at now, which is like I'm recording on a pretty consistent basis and going on trips and pushing my own boundaries, both out in the field as well as in the editing booth. Lots of wonderful, exciting possibilities from here on out. So yeah, I'm excited to jump in this journey with whoever decides to join us.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and joining Adventures Live, coming on to the team. I think you've made a huge change, and I know I'm personally extremely excited to see where we go with this. Again, thank you for sitting down, finding the time with me. We're Adventures Live. I'm Noah. This is Jeff. Thank you for joining us, and keep an eye out about additional Patreon content about this trip. And
yeah, if you'd like to replicate this trip and trips moving forward, we'll have supplementary podcast that's more focused on giving you all of the tools, from a gear list to your topo details. You can know exactly what the trail looked like. You can do it yourself. You can make your own tweaks, of course, whatever kind of experience you're looking for. But we want to break down as many barriers as we possibly can and make all of these trips as accessible as possible. So once you have the actual gear, you ask the questions that you want to ask. So you have the knowledge you need. You can go do it yourself.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you guys so much. You can find us on all the socials. We are at Adventures Live Productions on Instagram and Facebook, at Adventures Live on TikTok and Twitter, Adventures Live Productions on Patreon, and the link to our Discord, the ALP Campground, is in the link below. Thank you guys so much for joining, and Jeff, I'll catch you on the next trip.
Sounds good, dude. Looking forward to it.